voting, and we want to make sure everybody votes. And we are 3 days away from directing and changing the course of the history of our country. And there's so much at stake. So I don't have to tell you guys. You know, right now, first of all, let me just say this, because I'd like to, we got to have some straight talk. So, there's been a bit of a chatter about, Joe and me in terms of, like, what are our values. So, Florida, let me just set it real straight. Joe and I are proud, patriotic Americans who share the values of the majority of the American people. Values that are about uplifting and supporting working families. Values that are about having a president who speaks truth and conducts himself in a way that inspires good work, in a way that inspires people to understand the importance of treating other folks with dignity. Joe and I understand the importance of having a president of the United States who understands they hold the office in the public trust. That the first thing they should look at to figure out their job is the American people, not to look in the mirror. That's who we are. So let's talk about the challenges we're facing right now. We're in the midst of at least 4 crises that are happening all at the same time. We're in the midst of a public health crisis brought on by this pandemic, where over 225,000 Americans in just the last several months have died. Many so sadly, without their family members being present because of the nature of this virus. People who their last hours on this earth had to be spent without holding the hand of people they love. Over 9 million people have contracted this virus with untold long-term health consequences. Doctors are talking about things like lung scarring, other long-term consequences because of this virus. And the thing about this is, Palm Beach, it didn't have to be so bad. It didn't have to be this way. But we have a president of the United States who, thanks to Bob Woodward, we know, knew on January 28th about the seriousness of this virus, knew on January 28th when he was told it is 5 times more deadly than the flu. He was told it will impact people of every age. He was told it is airborne and lethal. And what did he do with that information? He sat on it. He covered it up. He told the American people it was a hoax. And here's the thing. Can you imagine what you would have done and how you would have planned as a parent, as a small business owner, as a teacher, if you had known what the president had known on January 28th? How you would have gotten ready for this? Because remember, even before this pandemic, he wants to talk about the economy, even before this pandemic, we had far too many American families that were working 2 and 3 jobs to put food on the table and pay the rent. And by the way, in a Biden-Harris administration, our belief is you should only have to work 1 job to put food on the table and pay the rent. But imagine how people would have prepared. How people, knowing that most working families don't have more than $1,000 in life savings, what they might have put aside, knowing that it might be the case that you have to shut down for a while. Teachers, parents, how they might have prepared for the fact that our children are missing significant portions of critical education days, months, weeks. And how we might have gotten ready. I mean, I joke about it, but how we might have just bought a couple extra rolls of toilet paper. Had we known But the president didn't tell anybody because, you see, he was more concerned about his political prospects than he was about America's public health. And on top of all of this, in the midst of this pandemic that has killed hundreds of thousands of Americans, Donald Trump with his boy Bill Barr are in the Supreme Court right now trying to sue to get rid of the Affordable Care Act, which President Obama, together with Vice President Joe Biden, created, which brought health care to over 20 million people who didn't have it, which covered people with pre-existing conditions and said it's not right to deny folks coverage because they have a pre-existing condition. Honk if you know and love somebody who has diabetes. Honk if you know and love somebody with high blood pressure. Honk if you know and love somebody with lupus or a breast cancer survivor. So on the one hand, you have Joe Biden, who says access to health care should be a right and not just the privilege of those who can afford it. You have Joe Biden, who says we're going to build on the success of Obamacare. We're going to expand coverage, bring down the cost of prescription drugs, bring down premiums. We're going to lower the eligibility age from Medicare to age 60. Joe Biden says that we understand when we're talking about health care, we got to stop thinking the body just starts from the neck down. We also need to provide health care for the neck up. That's called mental health care. That's Joe Biden's approach. And then there's Donald Trump, who wants to get rid of all of these protections and has the gall to suggest, as though we're not watching, that we're turning the corner. There are real clear choices in this election. On the issue of the economic crisis that in large part has been brought about because of this pandemic, you got over 30 million Americans who just in the last several months filed for unemployment insurance. We're looking at, in Florida, 1 in 9 families is describing their household as having been hungry. In Florida, in 1 in 7 households, folks who have described an inability or a concern about their ability to pay the rent. In Florida, 1 in 4 small businesses out of business, unlikely to be able to reopen. And on the economy, here's the thing. You ask Joe Biden, how's the economy doing? And you know what Joe Biden asks? How are working people doing? How are working families doing? That's how Joe Biden thinks. Joe Biden says you want to deal with the economy, then we're not going to raise taxes on anyone making less than $400,000 a year. And we're going to put in place middle-class tax cuts. Joe Biden says, I understand one of the greatest ways to create wealth in a family is home ownership, so we will have a $15,000 tax credit for first-time home buyers. Joe Biden says working families should never pay more than 7% of your income in child care. On the other hand, you got Donald Trump, who, when asked about how the economy is doing, asks about how the stock market is doing, asks about how rich people are doing. Well, let me tell you guys, Palm Beach, we're going to turn everybody out to early vote today and tomorrow, and then those who didn't get around to it, although we want them to get around to it, we're going to get them to vote on Election Day, and God willing, we win this election. And Joe Biden and I then are about to get rid of that tax cut benefiting the top 1% and the biggest corporations. And we will invest that money in working families. We will invest that money in an infrastructure plan that is about building back up our roads and our bridges and an investment in renewable energies. And that is going to be about the creation of jobs We are going to invest that money in our students who come from families who make less than $125,000. So you go to a four-year public college for free, including an HBCU, both public or private. We will invest that money in our students who come out of school and graduate and decide to go into a job that might be public service and pays less than $125,000 and erase your debt. That's what the people deserve. These crises, a public health crisis, an economic crisis, and then let us talk about the long overdue reckoning on racial injustice in America. So on the one hand, you have Joe Biden, a student of American history, someone who has the courage to speak truth, who has the courage then to speak the phrase, Black Lives Matter. Joe Biden, who says, look, it may be difficult to hear, it may be difficult for some to speak, but we got to deal with this. We've got to deal with our history. We've got to deal with the present. We need to deal with the fact that the racial disparities cross from our public health sector to our criminal justice sector, to the economy, to our education system. We got to deal with the fact that we've now figured out from COVID how these things manifest themselves to the point that African American and Latino Americans are experiencing 3 times the contraction of COVID and dying at twice the rate of other populations. We need to speak that truth. Speak the truth that Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die in connection with childbirth than other women. Speak the truth that our Native American brothers and sisters have the highest rates of diabetes of anybody in our country. And let's confront these truths. On the other hand, you have Donald Trump, who at that debate, remember the first debate? Refused to condemn white supremacists. And then doubled down and said, stand back and stand by. And it's important to remember, this was not a one-off. There is a pattern at play here. It's important to remember that this is someone who campaigned and came into fame running for office, questioning the legitimacy of the first Black president of the United States. Let's see the pattern here when he was asked about Charlottesville, where people were peacefully protesting racial injustice. A woman died. And on the other side, there were neo-Nazis wearing swastikas, carrying tiki torches, hurling racial and anti-Semitic epithets. And when the President of the United States was asked, he said there were fine people on both sides. We deserve better than this. We deserve better than this. Because you see, Joe knows that the true measure of anyone's strength, and in particular the true measure of a leader's strength, is not based on who you beat down, it's based on who you lift up. And you know, look, Palm Beach, we're going to have a lot of healing to do. We got a lot of repair to do. And I'm going to tell you, Joe, in his heart and in his soul, is committed to unifying our country. Joe knows that regardless of where you live, your race, your ethnicity, your age, your gender, the language your grandmother speaks, Joe knows that the vast majority of us have so much more in common than what separates us. The crises include, Florida knows this well, a climate crisis. You know, you all know I come from California. The west coast of our country, from California, Oregon, Washington, over to Colorado, has been burning. I have met with families that have had to be evacuated from their homes, never to be able to go back. I have met with firefighters who are fighting fires while their own homes are burning. My brother-in-law is a firefighter. Up and down the Gulf Coast, the neighbors to here, we have seen 5 named storms just this year. And you know, you name a storm because it's really big and harmful. We've seen in the Midwest floods that have caused farmers to lose a whole season of crops. And so Joe says, look, we got to deal with this with a sense of urgency and put in place timelines. We need to have net zero emissions by 2050. We need to invest in renewable energies. We need to invest in solar and wind. And Joe knows that all of this is also about building back up our economy. It'll be about creating jobs. It'll be about partnering with the carpenters and the plumbers and the electricians, knowing that this is about building up the skills of the American workforce to be a leader once again on a global crisis issue. On the other hand, you have Donald Trump. So when he was asked about the wildfires in California, this journalist asked him and basically said, you know, Mr. President, the wildfires are happening and scientists are telling us that there's a connection between that and extreme weather conditions that are human caused, and what do you have to say about it? The President of the United States, who is also the Commander-in-Chief of the United States, responded by saying, science doesn't know. What is that? Mr. President, science does know. And that's why the leading scientific magazine has endorsed Joe Biden to be the next president of the United States. So there's a lot to deal with. And that brings me to my visit today and us coming together this beautiful afternoon. You know, a lot of people, everybody is a leader here. You wouldn't be here if you weren't a leader. And I'm sure that people have asked you what they have asked me. And they ask me, they say, Kamala, why should I vote? Right? People ask that. Why should I vote? And I do believe there are 3 reasons that people should vote. One is to honor the ancestors. Honor the ancestors. This year, we just lost a great American hero in Congressman John Lewis. Let's honk for John Lewis. I know he hears us. I know he hears us. I know he hears us. John Lewis, who shed his blood on that Edmund Pettus Bridge for the right for us to vote, in particular for the right for black folks to vote. John Lewis, who understood that the fight for people's right to vote is a civil rights fight, which is why in the course of his life, John Lewis was also front and center in the fight for marriage equality, why John Lewis was front and center in the fight for dreamers, because John Lewis understood that all of these issues are connected. Let's honor the ancestors. Let's remember this year we celebrated the 100th anniversary of the passage of the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote So let us honor all those suffragettes who in their white would march and shout for a woman's right to vote. And while we remember history, we must always speak truth that not until 1965 could black women vote, so we got to deal with that too. But let's honor the ancestors. That's a reason to vote. Reason number 2, everything is at stake. Everything is at stake. We have talked about the health, literally the health and well-being of the American people. We have talked about our economy. We have talked about issues of racial justice. We have talked about the climate crisis. Let us also talk about the need to create a pathway towards citizenship and renew the promise to our dreamers with DACA. Let us talk about fighting for a woman's right to make decisions about her own body. Let us talk about restoring the dignity of our country on a global stage and restoring the principles of a rule of law and a democracy. All of these things are at stake and so much more. And then the third reason to vote, I believe, is this. So Florida, you've been seeing what we know has been happening around the country. And it's historic in nature. But I'll just go back to recent history in 2013, when you remember the Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act with that case called Shelby v. Holder. And almost immediately thereafter, about 24 states put in place laws that were designed to suppress the vote, to purge the voters' rolls, right? Awful things. In fact, so much so, North Carolina, where I've been, and we'll go back, the court that reviewed what they did said that they wrote this law with, quote, surgical precision to prevent black folks from voting. But all over our country, efforts to make people of color, students, Native Americans, prevent or make it difficult for them to vote. And so, and here in Florida, we know that's been happening. I mean, I'm traveling the country. I was in Texas yesterday. Right? And I was in Houston as my last stop, Harris County. I love the word. Harris County, you know, in Texas, they made this rule that only one drop box for dropping off your ballots per county. In Harris County, where Houston is, there are 4 million people. In other states, they're saying, well, if you want to vote by mail, you got to fill out the ballot, then put it in one envelope, and then you got to put that envelope in another envelope, and then you got to make sure you sign it, and then in other places, you got to make sure somebody else signs it. They're trying to make it difficult for us to vote. They're trying to make us weary and tired and overwhelmed. They're trying to confuse us about the legitimacy of the process. I mean, they even stoop so low as to mess with the post office. The post office. Some of the nicest people in the world are postal workers. Why are they doing all this? This is the question that must be asked. Why, with so many powerful people, try to make it difficult or confusing for us to vote? That is the question to ask. And here's what I believe is the answer. They are doing this because they know our power. They know our power. They know when we vote, things change. They know when we vote, we win. So let us not ever let anyone take our power from us. Let us always know our power. And at election time, the power of our voice is through our vote. And here's my last point. This moment will pass. This moment will pass. And years from now, our children and our grandchildren and others, they will look in our eyes, each one of us, and they will ask us, where were you? Where were you at that moment in time? And what we, Palm Beach, will be able to tell them is so much more than just how we felt. We will tell them what we did. We will tell them what we did. We will tell them we were hanging out in a parking lot this particular Saturday afternoon with Kamala and all our friends. We will tell them how we organized and mobilized. We will tell them we emailed and we called folks and we texted until folks got tired of hearing from us, but we knew they'd get over it. We will tell them that we elected Joe Biden the next president of the United States. Thank you, Palm Beach. Thank you.